Welcome back to the Cruise Elite Podcast. Tony, what's up?
Good morning, Taylor.
How's it going?
Super excited for this episode because as much as we've talked about the Strength Dojo,
Right?
I actually don't know the nuts and bolts of your programming there.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm super excited to have this conversation today about strength training, mobility training, your day-to-day training philosophy.
Nice. I'm super excited to rest my brain from neurology. I mean, we'll talk neuro because you have to. I mean, it's not separate. We'll talk about how we incorporate neuro into the training philosophy. But yeah, it's a little bit of a break for me, to be honest with you, from the last couple of episodes, going from vagus nerve to trigeminal nerve. And yeah, this will be fun.
Yeah, and, for me, it's like the applied neurology, a lot of times we're problem solving. And not always. There's stuff that you recommend that you do just to like train different systems and just optimize. But a lot of times we're problem solving. And I just, realize I'm like, people need to be moving their bodies, lifting, not necessarily lifting weights, but being physical, training, strength training on a day-to-day basis. And it's just something that I feel like it's been a gap in our conversations, even though it's not a gap in your practice and your philosophy. So yeah, I'm super excited. I actually wanted to ask you, like, what are you doing right now for your training?
All right, cool. So right now, I'm actually in a very unstructured fitness for myself right now, which, to be honest with you, is my most favorite.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. Yeah. So I spent like the last 2.5, 3 years being very structured and, somewhat rigid in what I was doing, not in a bad way, rigid, but just I didn't deviate from the plan because I was following our own program. So I was following what we call the Strength Dojo.
Mm-hmm.
And that was great. So that was like probably 2.5 years, very structured. I had some personal goals of, increasing muscle strength. I was focused on, increasing some of the weight I was using on specific lifts. And that was fun. Like, that was cool. I hadn't done that in a while. Like, I hadn't had any goals like that. And that kind of kept me busy through, 2 winters ago anyway. And in the last, I don't know, it's been about almost a year now of kind of pursuing more of a movement practice, right? And this is typically how I've always done it, right? I've always been very freestyle in a sense with my training, where I find that I'll be pretty structured for, some amount of time following a program, have some goals within that, and then I'll just kind of cycle out of that. And it's a natural thing that happens. It's a natural thing, and it's for lots of different reasons. Sometimes it's because of some pain that comes up, right? There's like something that happens that triggers me and goes, all right, I got to start listening to my body. Let me shift my thought process a little bit and make sure I'm not leaving any stones unturned that things I should be working on for self-care and health and longevity. So sometimes it's motivated by that. Other times it's motivated by just kind of getting bored with a structured program. So currently, I am focused on all the stuff that I kind of love most, like taking all the types of strength training and just kind of dynamic skills that we can talk about at some point, and just kind of putting it into this little freestyle program. My strength training currently is all based on improving gait cycle. Like, that's my focus right now. I've talked about several times at this point, and I know our members in our community have heard me talk a lot about long-standing sacral and sciatic type symptoms that I've had throughout my life, which are tremendously better. But in certain instances, especially if my training stress gets high, I will feel tension in my sacral area. And so I'm always trying to make sure that I am doing things that respect gait cycle and the transfer of energy through the body the way that it really was designed to be. And we can talk about, some of the some of the specs on those types of exercises so our listeners have an idea. But yeah, right now for me, it's like I want to be strong. I want to be resilient. I'm working on mobility, right? I'm always doing mobility, but the strength training part, utilizing some of my favorite tools like kettlebells, club bells, which most people are actually not familiar with, but that's basically a steel club. You know, it looks like a baseball bat and it's heavy, right? And I've got them in several different weights. And then I also have a cable pulley system at home. And that's another one of my favorite tools for constructing some of these exercises that are great for mimicking and improving gait cycle. So it's freestyle for me right now, which is fun. I like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that especially, you know, as a fitness and strength professional, like you have a really good grasp on the fundamentals of like balancing your programming and like knowing when to push and when to kind of let
Totally.
off the gas and that kind of thing.
It's true.
That it might be harder for a beginner to do freestyle, right?
Totally. I wouldn't even really recommend it. It's always good for beginners to follow a program, right? Especially if you're a beginner in the sense that you actually haven't had much education on how to strength train, because it's all proprioception, right? Like if you don't know how to move your body in a specific way and gain the mechanical advantage for moving resistance, then you're going to put yourself in compromising positions and stuff might not feel good eventually. So like learning the basics of, you know, what is it to hip hinge? What is it to lunge? You know, what should a squat look like? What's ideal for my body type? Right? All of these things matter and they are fundamental when you're exploring strength training. So I always encourage beginners to get that education and to spend time with that and learn those exercises, treat them like a skill, practice them. Eventually what happens is after, you know, years of following the rules, I guess we would say, you get to break the rules, right? And then you get to explore movement in a completely different way. Like this is kind of how it's been for me. I spent years and years following the rules, like following the rules in terms of how do we do a specific exercise? How should a squat look and feel? What's the program look like? You know, I've followed those rules forever. And then I sort of was able to give myself permission to eventually break those rules and explore a whole new kind of fitness where I could do what I enjoyed most. I could piece things together and I didn't have to worry about being rigid and following a program all the time. And I even got to break the mechanical rules that are set for us about how an exercise should be performed.
Yeah.
Because it's really interesting to think about where you arrive after years and years of training. If you keep pursuing it, you arrive in a place where it's like, oh, I actually should break these mechanical rules that were set for me. Because if I want to make my body more resilient and I want to get stronger, I actually have to start exploring movement that puts me in awkward positions and takes away my mechanical advantage. And that's where I am today with training. And I have those foundational pieces. So I'm able to adapt to other things relatively fast and figure out how to do awkward things without paying a price later.
Yeah.
You know, and so it's like the journey of fitness is interesting like that, with, you know, going from something more rigid with a rule set to just getting away from that if you want to.
Yeah, one of the examples that comes to mind is like a round back deadlift, where it's like everyone's like, do not round your back on the deadlift, do not round your back on the deadlift.
Yep.
And then you see these guys who deadlift and have PRs that are just, you know, crazy, like powerlifter types.
Yeah.
And they train in a rounded position sometimes.
Absolutely. Yeah,
So
I mean, we hear it too, like
the rules.
Yeah, breaking the rules. Like your knees should never go over your toes with squats. You know, that's one that we've heard for forever. You know, and I'm purposely doing lots of different type lunging and squatting motions where the goal is for my knee to go over my toes and even my heels to come up. Oh my gosh, you know, don't let your heels come off the ground. It's funny how these rules have been created. But yeah, when you get to a certain level of conditioning and you have a certain level of experience, it's fun to go and have fitness be a little bit more, I don't know, just free, right? And you can explore these different things.
Yeah. The other pitfall that comes to mind about self-programming is sometimes, and I'm not saying you do, but sometimes people avoid the things that they should be doing but just don't like to do. For me, it was like just more intense cardio. Like
Yeah.
I was super happy doing heavy barbell lifts, but I
Right.
didn't want to sprint ever.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. I'm still guilty of that.
yeah.
Yeah. I'm still guilty of that. I mean, there's several things I should be doing. I should be doing more cardio myself. Right now, it's a little bit. So it's interesting with this whole cardio, right? Like, it's so fundamental and you need it in your life. You need cardiovascular exercise. And like you, I actually hate it.
Mm.
So, that's always something that I have to figure out how to strategically get into my life. And for the last 6 or 7 years, I've done that successfully with just hiking.
Yeah.
Because we do a lot of hiking, and it's a perfect activity for me. It's dynamic, it's challenging, it's not super, super intense. I can, I get a lot out of it, just physically and just overall well-being.
Yeah.
And then I have jujitsu, right? And so jujitsu is kind of like my higher intensity cardio.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But guess what I'm not doing right now?
Jiu-jitsu.
Hiking and jujitsu. So I'm in this like weird state that I have not been in several years. And there's reasons that I'm not doing these things. And a lot of them are work related. We're just kind of chugging along right now. We've got our heads down and we're very busy. We haven't had a chance to, or I haven't been training jujitsu, and there's been some on and off things that have gotten in the way of that too. Like back in November, I had the little knee injury, right? Then, got super busy with work and our enrollment. And then I had dental work done, and then I was chilling out because I didn't want to be like biting on a mouth guard aggressively. So like little things got in the way, and I'll go back to training pretty soon. But then hiking, we haven't been doing right now either because, well, it's almost springtime. It should be springtime, but we're still waiting for it. And over the winter, it's harder now. My daughter is 4. And so she's doing some of the hiking, but then I'm also carrying her some of the way. And the carrying part's getting challenging.
Yeah.
And then when
loaded
she's
carries with an unstable object.
Yeah. and so that's actually been a big part of my cardio that I actually, I mean, I don't like it when I'm doing it, but I like that I did it when I'm done with it. And it's been very helpful for me. But actually what's been happening is because it's been so cold, my daughter can easily get cold in the carrier because it's not a great carrier, and it kind of carries her like away from my body too much instead of like closer to my center of gravity. So yeah, there's been some little obstacles there, and I recognize it, and I got to start getting some cardio back in. But like you, I could easily avoid that, so I've had to strategically get those things into my life.
Yeah, I actually started playing pickup basketball with some friends.
Nice.
And that's been great cardio, but also great motivation to train outside of that because man, when you're just sucking wind and like you need to keep playing, you're just like the punishment motivates you to avoid that feeling,
Totally. I'm not super excited about going back to jiu-jitsu because I know that my conditioning has suffered now over the winter. Yeah.
But you bring up a good point. There's optimal, right? There's the ideal program and training regimen and sleep and diet and schedule and all of that. And then there's real life.
That's
where
right.
You have real life responsibilities and
That's right.
obstacles and whatnot. So I think maybe this is a good time to kind of zoom back out and talk about like, all right, what are your fundamentals for a good training program or a good training practice even? And in an ideal world, and then we can, kind of drill down on the particulars.
Yeah. So, you mentioned programming, and, as you just said, life happens and things get in the way of our fitness routines. And this is something that I sort of learned at an early age, even though I maybe didn't have the words to explain it, back in college even, and I wasn't as familiar. But, one of the things that has always been interesting for me as a coach and somebody who's been like learning about how to put together good fitness for a person. It's back when I was, in college, sort of at the crossroads of deciding which direction I wanted to go with what I was going to do in the health and movement field. I was always sort of being pulled in a traditional strength and conditioning direction,
Mm-hmm.
because when you have an interest in training, it's what people are presenting you with for an option. They're like, well, you could be a strength and conditioning coach and, work at your own gym, someone else's gym, work at the university at a university or a school.
Mm-hmm.
And even though I didn't know it back then, it never was appealing to me. And I now know why. Now, after another 23 years or so of experience, it's number one, I was always working, even though I worked with athletes, I still also work a lot with the general population. And through my experience working with the general population, there was always one big obstacle that was always in every single person's way.
Mm-hmm.
And that was their own life.
Mm-hmm.
And so no matter what I write down on a piece of paper for somebody to complete for their fitness, it didn't really matter because I couldn't be confident that they were in a healthy enough position the next day to complete it again.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have kind of taken this road as a coach where I am more committed to teaching people how to listen to their body and make smarter decisions about their fitness. And in that process, give themselves permission to not do all the things that the piece of paper says if it's not right for you today. And so I got kind of away from the rigid programming side of strength and conditioning and fitness. And yes, we do write programs,
Mm-hmm.
but I spend all the other time teaching our students and our members that you can make other decisions within your program. You don't have to do it all. You don't have to follow it perfectly. And you also have to know if it's not right for you that day because of other life stressors. And sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes it's that you feel amazing and you want to take advantage of that and you want to go after it a little bit more and, increase some of the training variables, make them more challenging, whatever. So it was very obvious to me early on and very obvious to me now that, the rigidity of programming is challenging for the general population. And it's nice to have that baseline structure. That's good. I'm saying that's a positive thing. But know that you have permission to switch things up a little bit if you need to based on your own needs.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you wanted to know about...
Well, real quick on
yeah.
that, just a personal anecdote. I
Yes.
feel like I didn't learn that lesson until my 30s,
Right.
when I would be following the programming and I wasn't recovering from it properly.
Yes.
And I would get sick or I would just feel like garbage or whatever. It's like I kind of learned through banging my head against the wall to be like, you know what? Instead of 3 sets of this, I'm just going to do 2.
Yeah.
And actually that's like one of my favorite tips is just reduce the volume and like
Big time.
It goes a long way. I recover better. Sometimes I even feel like I get more out of it somehow.
Yeah.
But yeah, it took me a long time to kind of figure that out on my own.
It took me a long time too.
Yeah.
It's like it's something that I started figuring out in college, but again, I didn't know, I wasn't super aware of it. I was still banging my head against the wall, still kind of suffering through things and not recovering, as optimally as I should and dealing with chronic pain in the process. There's no question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think part of it's the industry is telling you need to commit. You
That's
need
right.
to be consistent. You need to go hard.
Right.
A lot of people, they even say you need to feel sore or you need to suffer because that's where the gains are, right?
That's right.
And so I think that's been drilled into our collective psyche.
Yep.
In a way.
It was for me too. I mean, I remember I'm coming from a wrestling background. So I was, I successfully brainwashed myself
Hmm.
That's what you have to do in a scenario where you're going to be physically and mentally working past your absolute limits all the time.
Mm-hmm.
You have to brainwash yourself. So that's what I did to survive that. And I carried that mentality into my training. And yeah, I was strong. I had muscles too, man. I should show you a picture of my former self sometime. You'll laugh. You'll straight up laugh.
Really?
I'm like 30 pounds heavier and it's all lean.
Wow.
And it looks ridiculous. Like it's funny. Like it's funny. I'm going to text you something when we're done.
Yeah.
So it all worked, right? Like my goal was I wanted to be stronger and I wanted more muscles, and I got those things, but my body suffered in the process.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're focused on doing the training, but also teaching people to be in tune with their own bodies and to listen to that pain.
Yeah.
And yeah, so talk more about how you navigate that.
So as far as how you feel, like how do you navigate those decisions that need to be made?
Yeah. From both like you as a person, but also as a trainer to others, because it's way easier. You've got a program, you give it to people, you tell them how to do it, you give them feedback on their form or whatever, right? But like, how do you get them trained to know, hey, today I just need to, take it easy, or today I should really push a little harder.
Yeah. That word interoception that we've been throwing around a bit.
There's that neuro.
Yeah. So a lot of this is interoceptive training, essentially, understanding the cues that your body is sending you. And a lot of people suffer with that. They don't have great interoception. They don't really know how they feel. Oddly enough, that, a lot of people, they're not quite sure. So for me, with what we do as coaches, it all starts with, taking people through our basic assessment process where they get to immediately be the authority on their own body. So you're constantly giving them an experience where they're checking ranges of motion. They're comparing the range of motion to how they feel, right? How does this forward bend feel now, right? If I had discomfort, is that better? Have I gone further? It sounds really simple, but a lot of people, especially if you don't have an athletic background, have not had repeated experiences where they've been able to analyze how they're moving and how they're feeling. So for me, at the most fundamental level, that's where it starts, right? You're starting to teach people that they get to be the authority on how they feel in the moment, and they get to start understanding, the quality of their own movement. And that starts to go a long way. And then, what we do kind of over time and in the long term with our members is we start to share with them other kind of things that, I'll share my personal experience all the time on our live calls about the other things that come up for me in terms of cues that my body is sending me that signal to me that something needs to change, right? So like I was talking about having bouts of feeling tension on my left sacral area, right? And even though those problems are resolved for me, that's kind of like the chink in the armor kind of thing where
canary in the coal mine.
Yeah. Like if my threat bucket is overflowing, it's more likely that an area of your body that has experienced long-term chronic pain in the past, it's more likely that you're going to get some kind of sensation, and those things are going to come up again, even if there hasn't been an injury event. It's kind of like your nervous system remembering that there was high sympathetic activity there for a very long time. And so there's things that can come up in your life that work as reminders for us to help keep us in check. And so I share those all the time with our students and our members so that they can start thinking about their own body. And there's a lot of cues, right? There's a lot of alarms that go off with our general health that you can start to listen to, right? And I don't mean anything like catastrophic. I mean, these are little things. It could be a little pain, a little tension, right? It could be that, you notice something about yourself, whether it's not recovering as quickly as you should, feeling bloated, having issues with your mood, like if your mood is not, where it should be, or you're having trouble carrying your energy from one task into the next task during your day. Like there's so many things, right, that could go on that list. And constantly reminding people that those cues tell them things about their health in the moment will start to kind of snowball into this like interoceptive training experience where now they're building body awareness about themselves, and they can use that information to help make smarter decisions about their training. Versus like how I would approach training back when I was a freshman in college. It was like, dude, it didn't matter if I was sore. Like I was deadlifting that day. It didn't matter if my elbow was still hurting me from practice. I was still bench pressing that day, right? And going back, if I had just had more awareness to understanding those cues, and I had the confidence in the knowledge to just change my process a little bit, man, I would have done something a lot better for my body in the long run.
Yeah. Even my recent knee injury, I realize now after these conversations, like my threat bucket was high walking into that gym. So getting on the mats, I was already like, my body was already like at a limit, and I was feeling tired. I didn't really want to go, but I was like, oh, I committed to doing this X times a week. I got to go. And boom, injury, right?
I've been there. You made me think. You made me think of one like 2 years ago. I don't even remember what I was mad about, but I remember telling Alicia I was feeling very angry and frustrated about something. And in my mind, I was like, I'm going to go to jiu-jitsu tonight, and that's going to help me feel better.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's going to be...
A lot of times it does.
Because a lot of times it does, right? A lot of times it's an outlet, and it squashes those feelings, right? Yeah, I went and sprained my ankle.
Oof.
So it's like, and I texted her coming out, and I was like, yep, leaving class early, sprained my ankle. Luckily it wasn't too bad. It was like a 2-week thing, and it was not horrible, which is good. But that's similar thing, right? Like I had so much sympathetic activity that I wasn't performing well.
Yeah.
Right? Got me injured.
Yeah. No, and that's great, realizing when you're doing those assessments, the way that you put it, I'm empowering them to be the authority on how they're feeling.
Yep.
That's such an important psychological facet that I didn't even consider about the assessment process.
I mean, think about it, right? Especially the way we're inundated with all this health and fitness stuff online, right?
Yeah.
Everybody seems to be forgetting that they should be the authority on how they feel. And so that's important, because you shouldn't go and take someone else's word for anything, right? You really should just give yourself the freedom to try things and see how it goes. Right. And I've always been, a believer of that. And it's better than just, buying into someone else's philosophy just because they say something.
Yeah.
Right. You really don't know what
sounds good.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of we're getting lost as a culture in this mess, and turning to other people's opinions, like putting too much weight on someone else's opinion on something, about health and fitness. And also, in my opinion, turning to technology too aggressively to tell you something about your own body that you really should be able to answer, and technology is cool, and it's going to keep getting better. But this idea of knowing how you feel and what's, helping you, these are things we need to always be practicing so we can have healthy interoception instead of feeling lost and turning to our, smartphones and Apple Watches to tell us like, hey, do we feel good enough to train? What do my scores say? It's interesting.
Yeah, for sure. I realize I've sort of taken a big part of this conversation for granted, in that my assumption coming in is like, everybody knows they need to strength train, right? Everybody knows they need to do some sort of movement practice, right? But I realize that not everybody has a strength training or mobility practice. Not everybody does it. And a lot of people that don't do it, want to fix their pain with neuro. But maybe we should zoom even further back and just kind of make the case for why you have these practices and what they're like. what they're for.
Man, it's funny you say assumption. This is the story of my coaching career. And I'm still accidentally making these assumptions that people know what the basics are, right? Because in my opinion, right, like everybody should be strength training,
Right.
to, whatever that is for you. Everybody should be participating in cardiovascular exercise, right? Everybody should have a little self-care routine where they perform, 10 minutes, 15 minutes of healthful body maintenance to themselves so that they can feel better and move better. And I always accidentally make these assumptions that people are doing this. And what I constantly learn through perspective and talking to people who are like messaging me and reaching out is that actually a lot of people don't have those fundamentals.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it's a really challenging position to be in because, with our specialty of helping people bridge the gap between kind of a rehab state, moving more towards a training state, right? We're kind of living in the middle there, filling that gap for people. Man, it's a hard position to be in because everybody wants to talk to me about pain. And they want to talk to me about, whatever, health issue and pain issue they have. And they're very attracted to the novelty of like applied neuro for good reason. They're great tools. They work well. They work fast.
Right.
And I have conversations with people all the time. And I come to find out, this is so common. It's like, hey, well, what are you doing for strength training? People are like, well, I'm active. I'm an active, fit person. That's what I hear.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, okay, let me dig a little deeper. Like, so what are you doing? Like, what do you do for strength training? Well, I work in my garden on Saturday mornings. Okay, like, what are you doing that's like different from your, kind of like extracurricular type activities? Well, I work in the garden. Sometimes I go kayaking. I walk around the block, my friend. Like, no. That's not what I'm talking about. That's not the strength training fundamentals that you need. It's like, oh, well, I do Betty's boot camp in my living room, on Thursdays and whatever. And it's like, okay. So tell me about that. And, come to find out, I'm talking to, someone who has not picked up more than 3.5 pounds ever in their life during a workout.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It's just one example. And, there's so many. And so here I am. Somebody's asking me questions about the vagus nerve and the pontomedullary reticular formation and all these nerdy things that we love to talk about that are important for, performance and health. But at the most basic level, there's so many people that are not currently participating in strength training with some mobility training, with also some cardiovascular training.
Mm-hmm.
That in itself is a recipe for disaster when you're trying to improve your health and get out of pain, because you need those fundamentals,
Yeah. So why do you need that? Let's say I'm not bought in. Like, why do I need to lift a barbell? Like, what does that have to do with anything?
So I think of training as making ourselves more resilient, right? Making ourselves more durable, right? And, we talk about the threat bucket all the time. Instead of creating a smaller threat bucket, right? Because remember, our threat bucket will shrink if we don't do the right things. And then you have a smaller bucket that fills up faster. It's kind of like the movement box shrinking, right? Our movement options shrinking as we become more deconditioned. So the goal in my mind with training is to increase the size of our threat bucket, right? To become more resilient. The way that we do that is by repeatedly exposing ourselves to training stress. That's how you become a stronger, more resilient human being with a larger threat bucket, so that now you can handle more types of threat in that bucket. So for me, as a coach that, has always kind of been in a position to help people overcome pain issues that are creating obstacles for them in their fitness, I've had to educate about this. And when you meet a person who's not currently putting themselves under that kind of training stress, and maybe they never have, they just don't have the foundations. So they are a more sensitive nervous system, right? They're a more sensitive nervous system, and they cannot handle all the different types of training variables or even certain stimuli that we use in a lot of the neurotraining. And sometimes it's because they don't have the foundation that those drills can't go as far. It's really interesting. One of the things in applied neuro that we often have to do is called stacking, where we take several different types of stimuli, we put them together to make a more powerful drill. A lot of times we have to lean on our stacking methods to help somebody who's very deconditioned and essentially has a brain that can't handle as many types of training variables. And we have to lean on our stacking to do that. But what you often find in that process is that if you stack too many things together that actually require them to perform, whether it's like motor control combined with some level of cognition, they can't handle it.
Yeah, threat goes way up. Right?
Threat goes up, boom, your drill's done. Now you're increasing the person's threat and you're not accomplishing your goal anymore. So that's like on the neuro side of things, that's kind of the art of the craft, is learning how to stack these different things together so that you can find the right dosage for the person in front of you. That is very hard to do with someone who is very deconditioned.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so the other side of that coin is you're working with somebody that is the opposite, right? They're well conditioned. They have an athletic background. They're healthier. They have a healthier brain because they've been exposed to more movement over their life. A lot of times, those individuals don't even need the stacking. They do what we would kind of consider the fundamental basics of applied neuro, and they get great results because their body and their brain is like a sponge, and it can handle those things. It's really interesting to kind of witness those patterns.
Yeah, and it makes sense from a movement perspective. It makes sense from like a clarifying of the map perspective. Like getting into some of these positions, being in the bottom of a squat, doing a Turkish get up, like doing these movements, putting weight over your head. These are things that people may not do all the time in their day-to-day lives. And so that movement box could shrink. Right. That map could get blurry. When you have blurry maps elsewhere, the whole system is a little bit more nervous. Right. So just from a movement perspective, that makes a lot of sense to me. The other thing that I'm curious if this is how you conceive of it or not, is building strength provides security to the body and to the joints and to the spine, right? So if your brain is worried about you getting in an injurious position, but you've been strength training and you've got a ton of muscle around that bone that can contract and protect it, maybe that lowers threat as well. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I like that. That what you just said holds true with all the different training qualities, right? It goes beyond just strength, right? I would say the same thing for balance, right? Same thing for coordination. And we're trying to achieve all these things in our training. We need all these qualities of movement. When I work with someone who's deconditioned and they don't have that framework, right? Those basics, I'm essentially looking at them as if their nervous system considers themselves a threat because they don't have the movement capabilities. And you see how this changes people's behavior in life, the way they move through the world. When you see someone that's very compromised in their movement, it gives you a kind of a more intense window into how that changes the way you move through the world. If you have ever seen somebody that truly has a balance problem, they go about their life completely different than somebody who doesn't have a balance issue, or at least has better balance. And I mean physically, they go through life different. They take a different path than you. If you need to walk from A to B, they don't go the same way. I mean, that's literally what I'm talking about. So when you are missing these qualities, whatever they might be, if it's strength, balance, coordination, anything, To me, it's okay, you are now a threat to your own nervous system. All right. And we need to fill those parts of the map and give you those fundamentals, which will increase your movement box. It gives you more options, and then you start moving through the world differently, right? It's all about confidence, right? Your brain has to feel confident in moving through your environment. And that's what I look at training as. Like, we're trying to build confidence through having all these qualities that we want. It has to actually go past strength, right? Strength is key. It's fundamental. It always will be. But you have to have good motor control. You have to have good coordination, right? Balance is a huge one.
Yeah.
I actually put balance at the very base of the pyramid, so to speak, of training qualities.
Mm-hmm.
And that's originally how I was taught to through the Burdenko method and kind of my early education, where balance was the foundation of what was taught to me as the 6 essential qualities of fitness. It went balance, coordination, flexibility, endurance, speed, and strength. And strength was at the very top of the pyramid, and it took up the least space. And people were always confused by that. And it doesn't mean that strength is not as important as the other qualities. But what it really means is that balance and coordination, being at the base of that pyramid, were actually the things that you wanted to make sure you were never leaving out, and make sure that fundamentally you were getting that early on in your training. This all comes from, essentially, this model comes from Russian physical education.
Mm-hmm.
And balance, over the years, I've had my own opinions, and maybe I've played with where these things might go on the pyramid, but I always come back to the way it was taught to me in the end. And balance is at the base of that pyramid because you can't do anything without it.
Right.
Like,
If
you can't
stand
strength
up,
train. Yeah. You can't strength train if you don't have great balance or good balance, right? It actually becomes really hard. Yeah, you can do things to change the exercises a bit and give yourself support and assistance, but really we're talking about like performance. You got to have balance. It's kind of a prerequisite to everything else, right? And then comes coordination. So yeah, for me, looking at these qualities and just kind of trying to be reasonably fit with all of them. It's not even that you're trying to be, amazing. Just reasonably fit with all these qualities.
It does make me think of, the big debate that happened in the industry kind of between free weights and machines.
Yeah.
And how that was like a big, in the bodybuilder era, everything was machines and you were isolating muscles. And then, the barbell and the functional crowd came in and said, actually, you need free weights. From the perspective that you just came from, it kind of makes sense that one does tap into your balance and coordination more than the other.
It does.
I'm assuming you're doing you've just described you've used bells and clubs and cables. So you're mostly in the free weight camp in your training?
Mostly in the free weight camp. But you know what? We talked at the beginning of the episode here, right? We talked about the rules, right? And we talked about we talked about like finding an entry point to fitness that's gonna help you learn fitness. Machines serve a great value. I did a lot of machines getting into fitness. It was the first thing I ever did. I actually was very fortunate that early on in high school, I went to a high school with a really great wellness program, and we actually had classes that taught you how to use the fitness center. And so as a freshman in high school, I took a class that taught me how to use the machines in the gym. Pretty cool. Great entry point. You just walk over to the machine. It's got a little picture there, shows you the muscles you're about to work. You sit down, you put your hands on the handle, select some weight, and good. You're good to go. Like pull, press, whatever. And so they have value. There's no question about it. You will outgrow them, at some point if you want to, and you don't have to, but you'll outgrow them if you are somebody that wants to become more athletic. At some point you got to kind of graduate yourself from doing all machines because, remember, you're sitting down on an apparatus that's helping you stabilize your body as you, perform upper body or lower body exercise. And that might be useful for isolation if that's one of your goals. Back then for me, that was one of my goals. I wanted big muscles.
Yeah.
Right? I had no problem sitting on a machine and, working for them. But as your goals change and you want to be more athletic and you start learning about how the human body is really designed to move, you start looking at machines going, is that optimal for the goals I really have? And so I'm more in the free weight camp. I like to move like an athlete as I train. And I still do some of the kind of grinding type strength lifts where, they're simple and you're using a lot of resistance maybe to do them, but I'm usually still using free weights to do it. And then a lot of the time with my training, like I described at the beginning of the show, where I'm doing a lot of dynamic things that kind of replicate gait cycle, that looks very athletic, and I'm using much lighter weights to do it. And so it's, again, it's like that evolution that happens from beginning where you might be using machines to then graduating into more forms of fitness with free weights.
Yeah. And I could also see specific use cases like working around an injury or
Definitely
prehabbing something or just targeting a muscle that you haven't yet been able to connect with a compound movement.
Yep.
It's going to evolve and it's going to change from person to person, but you have a program that you write for the Strength Dojo.
Right.
So I'd love to talk. We don't have to outline the exact program per se, but I'd like to talk about kind of the nuts and bolts of like what goes into that, what's in the mix, why, and just give people an overview of like what that would look like.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And so just for a little bit more context, the Strength Dojo is the program that Tony's talking about. And the Strength Dojo is the strength training program inside of our dojo membership. And this is actually worth mentioning because so many people that take our neuro courses, regardless of how many times we remind you guys, you seem to overlook the fact that there is a program inside our membership that is ready to be explored. And it essentially takes all the different things that we like in fitness, all the different forms of, strength training and balance training and coordination training, and actually sprinkles in the neuro too. We literally have vision and vestibular exercises worked into the program in some really clever ways that keep the action moving and keep it fun. It's pretty cool. And a lot of times we have students taking our courses, and like just the other day, one of our students mentioned on a live call, they were like, we're going over vestibular training drills. And I was teaching about the 3 different reflexes that we're most interested in with vestibular training. We've got something called a VOR, which is keeping your eyes on a target while your head is moving. We've got something called a VCR, which is all about the muscular stabilization of your neck while your head and eyes and body is moving. And then we have something called a VSR. These are all reflexes: vestibulospinal reflex, vestibulocolic reflex. And the vestibular spinal reflex is something that we train by essentially moving our head very quickly, and the reflexive way that our trunk and spine responds to balancing us is very important, a very important reflex to train. So I was going through all that in one of our recent foundations calls, and all of a sudden one of our newest students, who by the way is not even a movement professional, goes, all 3 of those reflexes are in your coordination charts. And I was like, you are correct. And thank you so much for pointing that out. And so what she meant was we have something called a coordination chart, and it's a piece of paper you put up on your wall, and it has 36 different images on it. It's a star, and the star is in one of 3 positions relative to a vertical line. So you got 36 little images that all consist of a star and a vertical line, and the star can be to the right, to the left, or on the center of the line. It's really cool. It's like reading text or reading music. You stand in front of it, you read it as quickly as you can, and we assign 3 different movements to the 3 different possible star locations. So you're now moving using these movements based on what visual information is telling you. It's a more reflexive way to move. It requires a lot of reaction. And our student pointed out, she was like, I just noticed that the movements you're assigning to the stars are all vestibular drills. And I was like, thank you. That's awesome that you noticed that. And then several other students were like, what's a coordination chart? We've never seen this before. And we were like, people, it's in the Strength Dojo. Like, go check it out. So, there's a little context on the program. So the nuts and bolts of it. Okay, so typically with the Strength Dojo, we start with a joint mobility warm-up.
Okay.
This is probably going to take 5 to maybe 10 minutes, depending on, your experience with the joint mobilizations. But these are more isolated types of joint mobility drills where the goal is using a full range of motion and performing these movements with good motor control. And so, usually it's some kind of head to toe warm up where you're doing some mobility work for your feet, for your ankles, something for the knees, pelvis, spine, shoulders. It'll vary as we kind of cycle through different routines, but even your neck will be involved, your jaw will be involved, your hands. We've got drills for every joint in the body. And so typically we'll program joint mobilizations for the first section. And that then goes into a skills session. We call it a skills session. And that's going to be another, maybe 15-minute segment of the workout. And this is kind of cool and unique. And I feel like it's really important for people to hear this because this skills section is what I pretty much believe is one of the biggest missing parts of any kind of, general fitness program that you can find out there. Because one of my biggest frustrations with general fitness is that there's not enough dynamic movement involved with it. People are not moving through space the way they should. If you think about like strength training, up, down, okay? Get some more weight, slightly change your position, up, down, push, pull.
Yeah.
You're kind of in one place doing something that's fairly simple and you're not moving through space at different speeds and you're not being dynamic, right? So strength training is just its own thing. That's just something you need to know because it's limited in that sense. So in this skills section, we put tons of athletic movement, and this is where we do a lot of our vestibular and even vision training. So it may consist of different ground-based movements that kind of resemble martial arts, like some of the jiu-jitsu stuff that I like, maybe inspired by wrestling. We're teaching people how to do rolls on the ground, forward rolls, backward rolls, lots of just ground-based, ground to stand exercises, as we call them, or stand to ground exercises where you're learning how to navigate what I call the space in between. Okay, the space in between is everybody's blurry map when you don't have experience getting down on the ground and getting up, right? People that don't have good experience with ground-based movement, the ground becomes a very scary thing to them. And the space in between being in a standing position and being on the ground is very scary because that's the space you don't want to be moving through if you don't have the competency to handle yourself once you reach the ground. So I like to teach people how to fall in the training. They don't know that's what I'm doing, but I'm teaching them how to fall. I'm teaching them how to handle their body weight, how to load their body when they reach the ground, conditioning their joints to be able to be in maybe awkward positions once they reach the ground. And, we're doing that through vision training, vestibular training, ground-based training, all sorts of dynamic things. And it's fun, right? We kind of program it in a fun way. There's like cool little skills in there. Our coordination charts are always in there. Sometimes we even bring in ball skills, like cool, just simple little things you can do with a tennis ball, right? That kind of challenge your hand-eye coordination. So it's a neat section and it's kind of like an extension of the warm-up, but it offers a lot of the athletic qualities that we think people should be exploring.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And so much stuff that I don't see in typical programming. Do you do any jumping in that section?
I do, yeah. So jumping, skipping, jumping and spinning.
Uh-huh.
It's varied, right? And we try to program it in a way where people can pick the skill that they feel is the best fit for them based on experience.
Mm-hmm.
There can even be cartwheels in there.
Nice.
It's like ninja training. It's
Yeah.
like you try to be a ninja. Like we're doing all the dynamic stuff. Yeah, it's jumping rope, right? Just classical stuff
Yeah.
too that doesn't ever go out of style. And we add things to jumping rope. We even add vestibular drills like VORs to jumping rope. But yeah, it's pretty cool.
Nice. Nice. That's fantastic. And so a lot of vestibular training in there,
Yeah.
a lot of proprioception and different awkward positions.
Yes. Exactly. So after the skills session kind of comes the main body of the strength training. So this is there's a lot of variety to what we program for actual strength training. So when I say strength training, we're talking more slower things, using more resistance.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, there's some bilateral movements in there, although not a lot. Bilateral meaning like some of the standards people are used to, squat, barbell squat, barbell bench press, stuff like that, barbell deadlift. Like, yeah, we program that stuff, but we're not over devoted to that.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, I have a lot of reasons why we shouldn't be over devoted to that. But we recognize that its value, and we try to squeeze out some of that value without doing too much.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes people don't want to choose those things, so they have other options. We have kettlebell work in there, and we have cable pulley work in there, where little by little we have added just like a little bit of the steel clubs, but I've struggled with that the last couple of years because I know that piece of equipment is it's more foreign to people, and of course you have to have it, and most people don't. But we are kind of moving into a place eventually where we're just gonna have everything in there, and then people can just choose. And
Yeah, so it sounds like it's kind of modular, right? Like
Yeah.
there's in each section you kind of have options,
Yep.
is what it sounds like.
That's right.
That's cool.
Yeah, and they can
That's cool.
choose. Yeah, so let's say you don't have any experience learning how to barbell back squat. You could choose like a kettlebell goblet squat,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe you're a total rookie and you just want to stick with like a bodyweight squat because you're trying to dial in your mechanics, right? So we give you those options that are somewhat scaled. And typically for us, it might be 3 to 5 strength training exercises, right? And that's, fairly typical. And we're looking at, sets of 2 to, in rare cases, 4, kind of, but somewhere, in that realm. And then, of course, just educating people enough that like you are allowed to deviate from that if you want to.
Mm-hmm.
We try our best to teach people about the RPE scale, like rate of perceived exertion. And again, it's kind of an interoceptive activity. A lot of people don't really know how much effort they're putting into training until they start to learn what that feels like. And so we give people some education on that so that they can kind of have an idea for how they might use or vary their RPE throughout a 4-week training cycle that we provide.
Mm-hmm.
Starting maybe, at kind of a 6 or 7, and then working your way up more towards the end of the block if you want. But again, it always circles back to make the decision that's healthiest for you in the moment.
Yeah.
It's not fancy. The strength training is the strength training, right? It's a lot of the classical stuff that we know makes you stronger. Bulgarian split squats, RDLs, right? Very typical stuff. Sometimes we do add some dynamic stuff in there more towards the beginning of the session. So there's a whole category of exercises that I just call them contralateral exercises. And this is more of like when we started the episode, and I told you I'm working on myself with more like gait cycle type stuff. Contralateral exercises are what I'm talking about. And what that means is that they require coordination of opposite sides of the body that mimic gait cycle, kind of a reciprocated movement, right? So when one arm goes forward, the other one goes back. If you can imagine throwing a ball or punching, right? We have got great exercises done with bands, done with the cable machine that mimic things like punching and just rowing and throwing, stepping and punching, stepping and rowing. Like, this stuff is phenomenal for coordination, stability, health of your spinal cord. It's some of my favorite stuff, and it's very, I hate to use the word functional because it's like, that whole debate, but it's functional, right? It's using your body and coordinating it in a way that it was designed to be used, which is primarily always going to be driven by gait cycle, because our entire neural circuitry is designed around getting us from point A to point B as a human, right? From a survival standpoint, locomotion is king, right? And so I like exercises that train a lot of those patterns and reflexes. So we put that in the Strength Dojo, and oftentimes it's kind of more towards the beginning of the strength body of the workout because it requires a great deal of motor control, and you don't want to require somebody to do that when they're maybe somewhat fatigued from doing other things. It's kind of like more at the beginning. So yeah, that's the fun stuff that we have worked into the strength training portion.
Is there anything after that? Is there like a cool down or anything? Or
Yep, there is. So our cool downs are typically nerve glides, and also some breathing drills. And so,
you're hitting all the buckets here, man.
This is subject to change a bit. I mean, it's not. Don't get me wrong; it's not the only thing that you could put in a cool down, but it's been a good fit. All right, it's been a good fit, and so, remember, we started with the joint mobility at the beginning of the session, so we got that in. Now, at the end of the session, it's nice to have something to do if you want. It is kind of optional, where you can just work on dismantling some of the tension that you built up during the training session. So nerve glides are a good fit for that. And it's an opportunity where our more interested members can kind of, go through and learn the nerve glides. So we might program 2 of them. If it was kind of a session that required a lot of lower body work, then maybe in that section, you're going to find like femoral nerve glide and tibial nerve glide. And then usually what we do is at the very end, we have a breathing exercise, like the diaphragm stretch, something that is exhalation based, because that is more parasympathetic. So you've gone through a training session, you've elevated your sympathetics, right? That's good, right? So that you can have a good performance. Now we're kind of cooling down and we're sort of shifting our state more to a parasympathetic one. And it's nice to kind of end with something like that. So very typical, 2 sets of nerve glides based on the body parts that may have gone under the most training stress during the session, and then some iteration of diaphragm stretch just to kind of shift things more to a parasympathetic state. And that's where it ends.
Man, that sounds awesome.
Yeah, it's a cool... Alicia and I work together on this, and Alicia actually has been doing most of the programming, and it's been a good template. It's been a good template for us, and we're kind of, at some point, we're going to explore some little tweaks that we might make to it, but it has been good.
Part of why I love strength training is because it educates you on how to move and how to position your body and how to leverage your body in different situations. And you're taking that and expanding it out to all these other systems as well. There's vision, there's vestibular, there's nerve glides, there's joint mobility. And so you're also educating, you're not just training, you're also educating people on this kind of very, dare I say, holistic sort of approach, right?
Yeah.
So that's super cool. Circling back to rate of perceived exertion.
Yeah.
In the context of strength training, how does that relate to concepts like training to failure or rep range or total intensity? And by that, I mean like weight being lifted. Like, what are some of the guidelines that you give around that?
So rate of perceived exertion will basically give you, it's a subjective scale. It's based on the individual, but it basically would say something like, okay, I want you to use a rate of perceived exertion of a 7 out of 10. And then we have a little chart and stuff. And, you'll kind of scroll over and it will tell you approximately how many reps or where you would stop before hitting failure,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it might say this is like approximately 4 reps before failure,
Mm-hmm.
2 reps before failure.
Mm-hmm.
RPE of 9 is 1 rep before total failure. And, it's subjective for sure, but it helps people. This is a very good tool for a beginner
Mm-hmm.
because it helps people adjust their intensity so that they're not always working at a 5 RPE
Mm-hmm.
because that's not enough training stress to necessarily accomplish your goals. And then for like the meatheads like me, it reminds me not to work at a 10.
Yeah.
Right? Which is basically what I was always doing in high school and college, is working at a 10. So it gives you the ability to scale it a little bit and understand, how to, give you at least a general idea of where you might need to stop your effort. And it's a skill. It's a skill. It's teaching you more of that interoception so that you can understand your body's effort. It's also teaching you, for some people, and this is very common, it's teaching you what getting near a max effort would feel like,
Mm-hmm.
especially in a female population.
Mm-hmm.
It's not only females, but in my experience, especially in a female population, a lot of women, because of essentially media telling them how they should exercise, and, it's a whole nother topic, they might not ever explore close to max effort in their strength training.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a blurry map for that, right? You don't
Interesting.
want
Yeah.
that, right? You need to understand like what that effort is. And usually when those people have gone years and years and years, having not gone past a certain level of intensity, they just start assuming they can't do it. They're like, I can't do that. And so it's like, hey, Alicia and I both have personal training clients like this. It's like, hey, go grab those 40-pound dumbbells. They're like, 40s? It's like,
Yeah.
well, yeah, like we've been doing 35. We've been doing 35. They're like, that's 5 more pounds. Like, yeah, that's
Yeah.
like like half a grocery bag.
Yeah.
Let's give it a shot. And people get boxed in to what they think they can do for effort. And guess what? That's what you build. And that's what you build for a map, right? For your intensity. So RPE helps people explore beyond what they thought was possible. It also helps people back off.
Mm-hmm.
And that for me personally has been one of the harder things. So like, can you stop yourself at what you feel is an RPE of 7
Mm-hmm.
and walk away even though you feel like you could have done more?
Yeah.
Guess what? That's a skill, and that skill will keep you out of trouble. So varying the effort, it can be a useful tool. It doesn't always have to be, you don't have to be redlining every time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
there's a price to pay for that in the long run.
There's the concept of like undulating periodization, right? Where
Yeah.
it's like we go up to higher intensity and then we go to lower, and it's like a sine graph almost.
Yep.
And it sounds like that's kind of built into the model here.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's something that we sort of expect that, you might take a little time with it at the beginning if it's new to you. It's a little cumbersome, and you gotta put a little effort into having the discipline to actually think about it that way. But then we encourage you to kind of just drop the idea because you're dialing it in. Like you know the concept and you don't have to like refer to the chart to understand your effort, right? You're just kind of getting familiar with like generally what a 7 feels like, generally what an 8 feels like. And that's enough. That's enough to kind of give you a sense for where you should be working. And we actually program for people who are really interested in it. We actually put in the description of the program, like you should be working at a 7 or an 8 RPE this week,
Yeah.
right? And
Okay.
we actually give people those guidelines for the ones that do want to follow it in a more structured way, where we might kind of start you lower on the scale and then build you up.
Mm-hmm. For someone that's very motivated to create change, do you recommend that they air higher on the scale on average? Is there anything else that you would change?
I think I would want to know like as far as change goes, like what that really is and what that
Mhm.
goal is.
Mhm.
I'll be honest with you and just say it like this. People that just have the goal of putting on muscle mass
Mhm.
don't do well in our program,
Mm.
because our program is more based on health, performance, and longevity. It's not an isolation type bodybuilding routine. It's not just a powerlifting routine. It's very dynamic. It's more dynamic than what the average person has ever experienced,
Mm.
because we're bringing in so many different things, right? So it has to, I would want to know what the person's goal was. And if more strength is kind of part of your goal,
Mhm.
then yeah, it may be useful to work higher on that RPE. But at the same time, I just always come back to this fact that you're still going to have to change it up some days. You're still going to have that day where in your mind you want to be working at an 8, and you probably shouldn't because you only slept 5 hours the night before,
Yeah.
right? And it's okay if you don't do that today. Instead, you focus on the other things, maybe dial back the intensity on the weight training, maybe you chop off 2 of the exercises and reduce the volume of total sets, and you get through it. You walk away feeling like you could have done more. That's a good thing. And then you're back on track the next day.
So we alluded to this earlier in the connection between, having a balanced regimen like this and pain. Have you seen any stories? Are there any people who've reached out after doing this type of training with you where their pain has, without like an actual targeted intervention, their pain has lessened or disappeared?
Yeah, for sure. For sure. So actually, after this podcast, I'm on Zoom with a guy in our membership who's this guy. So this doesn't happen for everybody, but this particular guy, he's a private client of mine. He does our program and originally found us because he was attracted to the idea that we still wanted to be athletes, but we also wanted to resolve pain issues. And he's one of those guys that just the generalized program helped him resolve his, I think it was like a hamstring issue,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's really cool. When that happens, that's a testament to really a healthy person,
Yeah.
right? Who's just really needed the fundamentals structured in a way for them that they could get something out of it. And that should be the case for a lot of people. It's not the case for everybody, because
Yeah.
sometimes you just have a pain issue that's creating a big enough obstacle that
You need
it's
to huff ammonia or something.
yeah, yeah. You need to crack a smelling salt stick, and that's yeah. Um, so it's not the case for everybody, but it will be the case for some people. And I always tell people, because going back to what we were sort of talking to closer to the beginning of the episode, like you have to have those foundations. And if you're strength training and you're doing this kind of thing, it's going to be easier to achieve your pain goals too.
Yeah.
Just because you're going to be more resilient, you're going to be healthier. So it is fun when somebody reports back to you that just the generalized program has really knocked out their problems. And
Yeah.
it does happen. It's fun when it does. And there's also, I think, one of the more satisfying things for me as a coach is when I do get across to somebody that they can change their mindset in the way they approach the program, making decisions for themselves. And then they report back to me that they're like, hey, I made this tweak, and I noticed that when I was doing RDLs, that old hamstring issue was flaring up a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I decided to do tibial nerve glide
Mm-hmm.
before I did the RDL. And then I went and did the RDLs and I had no pain, and I was able to get what I wanted to get out of the exercise, and I didn't pay a price for it the next day. Like those are my moments
Yeah.
where I'm like, nice, like that's what we're really trying to do here. And the people that really commit to the process and are listening, right, during all those weekly calls that I teach to
Mm-hmm.
give them these tools and encourage them to have the confidence to make those decisions. Those are the big victories, I feel like. And that kind of stuff happens constantly. which is so fun to hear about.
It's truly the opposite of the problem you outlined at the very beginning of the episode, where it was like you were trying to get people strong, but their schedules, their pain, their injuries were getting in the way. Now it's like you're trying to get people's pain and injuries out of the way and teach them how they can do that, and then they can get strong, right?
That's right. It's a very challenging space to work in, because I'm ultimately trying to get people to a place where they can use their body the way that they want to do anything they want and not pay a big price for it negatively. And sometimes somebody shows up and we actually have to use our neuro tools first to help give them an entry point into what is fitness.
Yeah.
You know, and other times you don't have the foundations of fitness. So our neuro tools aren't necessarily the best step for you first.
Right.
Right? Because we got to work on that foundation. So it's part of the challenge, and it's good for people to hear about that. Right? It's a quick funny story. I got a DM last week from somebody that was asking about plantar fasciitis. And she was like, I listened to your podcast, the whole podcast that you had one of your members on who overcame plantar fasciitis. And that was Karen's story. And she goes, I listened to the whole podcast, and the lady talked about, meaning Karen talked about consistently strength training and every single morning consistently waking up and practicing her mobility drills. But this lady went on to say she never explained how she healed from plantar fasciitis. And I'm reading this message and chuckling because it wasn't the first person to say this to me. And I responded and I was like, no, smiley face, right? Put a smiley face. And I was like, yo, you missed the point. It was the consistent strength training and the consistent mobility training that resolved her plantar fasciitis. There was no magic tool in that case that helped her heal, as this person wrote to me, heal from the plantar fasciitis. It was doing the hard-nosed basics with consistency that allowed her to overcome that. And so often plantar fasciitis is, you usually see two types. You've got people coming to you talking about it and they're like overtraining and they have like bad habits with their training. And then you have this other population of people that are complaining about it, and it's all based on being deconditioned and undertrained, more lifestyle habits, if you will. And so it was just interesting to get that feedback, because I'm getting constant perspective, like we talked about, on the assumptions that I make.
Yeah.
And people are always going to be attracted to hyper-focusing on their pain.
Right.
And looking for some sort of thing that looks novel that might be able to solve it.
Yeah.
But in the end, you cannot forget that neuro was never the goal. That's what people have to understand. Neuro was never the goal. It's just the tool set that we use to improve performance in little ways and to help overcome pain issues in little ways. But it's kind of the thing that we just are sprinkling on top of the main course.
Yeah.
And the main course is the fundamentals of strength training that we've talked about, the fundamentals of mobility training, having cardiovascular exercise in your life, right? Those are the things that kind of set the stage for everything else to work better. And, for our students that are getting involved in neuro, right? You guys got to hear this too, because this is something I fell victim to early on, and so did Alicia. When you're in like a state of learning this stuff, it's so exciting when you learn applied neuro, because you start seeing and experiencing that you can make very fast changes in people's performance and how they feel. And you can kind of get lost in that cycle and forget what I said about the fundamentals of just fitness being most important. But you yourself can kind of get lost and stop actually practicing fitness yourself and thinking that you can solve everything with, neuro drills. And it doesn't work that way. And I found myself kind of gravitating towards doing too much of that kind of thing early on, and then coming full circle back to understanding this concept of build my threat bucket bigger, teach myself how to be more resilient by always exposing myself to enough training stress to do that.
Yeah.
And then no matter what I want to sprinkle on top, it's always going to work better because I have those foundations.
Yeah. Yeah. Like training really is like home base.
Yeah.
And so for some people, you need to use neuro to get them to home base.
Yes.
And some people, they forget to stay at home base and they're too focused on the neuro.
Exactly.
We talk a lot about kind of other modalities, and not in a disparaging way, but just in a like, when all you know is the mechanical side of things, that's what you're going to focus on. And that makes sense. And I guess the warning is don't fall into the trap of using neuro to try to solve every single thing when, good old fashioned training might do the trick.
That's well said. I mean, getting stronger fixes a lot of things.
Yeah,
it really does.
Well, that's awesome. Where can people sign up?
So, what people need to know is that if you're interested in engaging in our strength and mobility programs, those are things within our dojo membership. Now, the way that our whole kind of offering works right now is that our students that come through our Neuro Foundations course and our more advanced course, the Neuro Dojo, we have a membership that's reserved for supporting our students in ongoing continued education because there's just so much to teach you. And it's within that membership that you have access to from taking one of our courses that you can find all of our strength training programs and mobility programs. So that's something to be excited about. And we like the idea of being able to support people not only in the learning of applied neurology, but also to give you a program that you can practice that essentially brings it all together for you so that you can make sure that you are the well-rounded athlete that you want to be.
Awesome, man.
All right, there it is. I hope you enjoyed this episode on some of our training philosophy, and hopefully, you're starting to understand that, neuro really was never the goal. It's just a tool set that we use for achieving the things that we want to achieve, whether it's improving our performance or decreasing pain. If you want to get deeper into applied neurology so that you can do that, the best place to start right now is in my free Neuro Master class, and you can find the link for that in the show notes. So get in there, try that out, and reach out to me. If you have questions about any of the material that's in there, let me know. People have been really, really enjoying it. Also, if you didn't know, we have a YouTube channel and we're starting to really up our game over there. So if you're looking to go deeper into a lot of the concepts that we talk about here on the podcast, definitely go over to YouTube, subscribe to our channel there because things are getting good over there. All right, that's it for this episode. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we'll be back soon. Peace out.